Our study of Isaiah takes us now to chapter 40 and to the beginning of the second section of the book of Isaiah. Chapters 40 through 66 form its own independent writing block in comparison or in contrast to chapters 1 through 39. Those first 39 chapters were very focused on the here and now of the nation of Judah and the threat of Assyria and the lingering threat of, unbeknownst to them, Babylon growing in power and soon to take them into captivity. Chapters 40 through 66 focus heavily on the Babylonian threat with Assyria now behind them, and a great portion of the text of these last 27 chapters is the prophet preparing his people mentally for their going into Babylonian captivity. But another large portion of this second half of the book is the prophet paving the way for the people to prepare themselves for the coming Messiah, who will ultimately redeem them, not from physical captivity, but spiritual captivity. That contrast, that dichotomy, is a lot of the reason behind the rejection of Christ when he came and offered his ministry, the rejection by the Jews. They looked for a Messiah who would be a physical conquering hero, someone who would free them from the Roman oppression under which they had lived in the time of Christ. As Isaiah prepares them to go into captivity in a physical sense, he writes about their coming out of captivity in a spiritual sense. That misconnection is the cause of great consternation by many of the Jews in Jesus' day. Nevertheless, that is the way Isaiah approaches his subject. As we look at chapter 40, what you really have in this first chapter of the text is an introduction to the remainder of the book of Isaiah. It is divided really into two halves, with the first 11 verses being kind of an introduction to the chapter and the rest of the text, and then the remainder of the chapter, verses 12 through 31, giving Isaiah an opportunity to explain the greatness of God and the magnitude of God, and how because he is so spectacular, he and he alone can save the people, and they don't need to trust in idols who cannot save them, but rather trust in God who can. It begins, Isaiah 40, with the prophet being told by God, comfort ye, my people, says your God." He wants the people to have comfort and solace with the Assyrian threat behind them, as chapter 39 ended, and with the lingering threat of Babylon still to come. In spite of that, comfort, because salvation is coming. Verse 2, "Speak ye comfortably to Jerusalem, and cry unto her, that her warfare is accomplished, that her iniquity is pardoned, for she has received of the Lord's hand double for all her sins." The kind of warfare that Isaiah writes about, from which the people will find comfort, is not a physical warfare, but is a spiritual one. As he says, their iniquity is pardoned. The warfare, the battle against God and sin, and man and sin, is won by God. And if we trust in God and turn to him, we will win that war. "Speak ye," he says, "comfortably." The word means speak out of a comforting attitude. Speak from the heart to my people. And cry unto her, preach, herald to her, that the warfare that she is engaged in of her soul, her spiritual warfare, is now pardoned. Why? Because God has doubled, his hand has doubled all their sins. If you were to visualize it like on a scale, you have all of the sins of man over here, and they have weighed down the scales. So God puts his hand on the scale, but he doesn't put it on there once, he doubles it, so that God's weight is more than the sin of man. So man's sin is down here. God doesn't press his hand once to even it. He doubles it to give him the advantage. Verse 3. "The voice of him that cries in the wilderness." That's Isaiah's way of saying, I now hear a voice, as though he was crying from the wilderness and saying, "Prepare ye the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God." That's a quotation given later by John the Baptizer, the forerunner of the Messiah, who would quote here from Isaiah and say, "That's my mission. I am the one planned and predicted to come forward to prepare the way of the Messiah. Isaiah's perspective is looking forward. And as he is preaching, he hears by inspiration this voice coming out of the wilderness. Now, whether that is the wilderness that separates Babylon from Judea, or whether it is a metaphorical wilderness of sin, either way, coming out of the wilderness, he hears the voice of the prophet of God, John the Baptizer, saying, "Prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight the desert, or in the desert, a highway for our God. Prepare a way for God to come to man," as the Christ will do. "Every valley shall be exalted, every mountain and hill shall be made low, every crooked shall be made straight, and the rough places plain." That is a summary of the ministry of John the Baptizer. He takes the meek and lowly and exalted them and prepared them for the Messiah. He took the high and arrogant mountains and humbled them to prepare them for the Messiah. He took the crooked, the wrongdoers, and made them straight. He took the rough, the calloused hearts of men and made them smooth or plain. That's a summation of the ministry of John the Baptizer, illustrated perfectly or typified in his conversation in Matthew 3, where he spoke to friend and foe and said, "Christ is coming, and he will baptize you, some of you with the Holy Spirit, some of you with fire, whether you're on his side or not." Verse 5, "And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed." John chapter 1, we beheld his glory, the glory of the only begotten of the Father. "When the glory of the Lord is revealed, all flesh shall see it together." All flesh, not just Jew, but Gentile as well. "For the mouth of the Lord has spoken it." When the Messiah has finally come, when his forerunner has prepared the way, and the glory of the Lord is revealed, everybody will take part. Everybody will bask in. Everybody will enjoy the blessings of the Messiah, Jew and Gentile alike. Verse 6, my King James says the voice, but really it is a specific voice. Another voice Isaiah hears that says, "Cry." And John the Baptizer, the first voice he heard, replies, "What shall I cry?" The answer is, cry these words, herald, preach these words. "All flesh is grass, and the goodliness thereof is as the flower of the field." And we'll see in just a moment that he's referring to mankind. All of men, from God's perspective, are like blades of grass. There's a lot of them, but they're not really significant. They offer all the goodliness, for all of the beauty and spectacularness of man, for all the good that man can accomplish. It is still just like flowers in a field. Verse 7, "Grass withers, flower fades, but the Spirit of the Lord blows upon it." Or rather, because the Spirit of the Lord blows upon it, and surely the people is grass. Mankind springs up like grass in a field, the best of man, like flowers in that field, but still, God can and blow them down and knock them over, because compared to them, man is nothing, or compared to God, man is nothing. Again, verse 8, "The grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of God shall stand forever." That's 1 Peter 1, 22 through 25. Peter will make a reference to this text from Isaiah. How do men fade? It is by the power of God. What stands and doesn't fade, Isaiah says, is again the power of God, His Word. Romans 1:16. And so man comes and goes, and that's a theme that will progress throughout this chapter. But God is eternal. God is bigger than all of that. Now, why mention this? Because this is the message of John the Baptizer in a nutshell. John the Baptizer, who is preparing for the Messiah who is the Son of God, who will save men from their sins, the warfare of their sin, as Isaiah worded it. You can't be saved by you. You can't be saved by your doing. You're just grass, flowers in a field. You can be knocked over by God. You need God to save you, is the point Isaiah is making. Now verse 9. The message turns from John to Isaiah. As my Bible says, "O Zion that brings good tidings," and later, "O Jerusalem that brings good tidings." Better translation, based on other manuscripts, seems to be God is saying to Isaiah, "O Isaiah, to Zion bring good tidings," and Isaiah, "to Jerusalem bring good tidings." He's telling the prophet, bring them the good news. To the high mountains, bring them the good news. Lift up your voice with strength, literally with courage. He's telling his prophet, preach to Jerusalem, preach to Zion with strength and with courage. Lift up your voice, be not afraid, Say to the cities of Judah, behold your God, which is the theme of this first chapter. Just look at God. See how spectacular He is. Look at God. See how humongous He is. Look at God. See how strong He is. And if you trust in God, He will save you. And so don't be afraid, Isaiah, to preach that message, God says. Verse 10. Behold, the Lord your God will come with strong hand. His arm shall rule for Him. Behold, His reward is with Him. His work before Him. Behold the arm of the Lord, a phrase that will be repeated a lot in this final section of Isaiah's book. And Isaiah says, behold the arm of the Lord. Behold the doing of God. How strong it is. How powerful it is. His reward, that is the payment a master gives to a servant, is with him. Are you on his side? His work, that is the payment a servant receives from a master, depending on your perspective, those two words, is before him. God's coming to reward those who stand by him. He's coming to give wages to, he's coming to give the payment to, a reward to those who serve him. Are you going to serve him? Isaiah says. That's his strong and powerful arm. But then verse 11 says, he will feed his flock like a shepherd, gather the lambs with his arm, carry them in his bosom, and shall gently lead those that are with young. Jesus, the Messiah to come, his arm is not just powerful, but also tender and compassionate. John chapter 10, I am the good shepherd. Here Isaiah says he will feed his flock like a shepherd, gather them, comfort, carry them, hold close to them in his arms and in his bosom. Lead them that are with young, those who are still nursing and need extra care. He will provide it. And so he turns his attention now, having introduced this text, the Messiah and his greatness, and kind of setting the stage for what he'll talk about through the rest of this book. He turns his attention to his last focus in this chapter, how big and how great God is compared to the idols that Judah tends to trust in. And it starts in verse 12 when he says, who has measured? God has. He's saying, God has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand. God can take all of the water that has ever been poured into the oceans, and he put them in there, and he had them cupped in his hand. That's how big he is compared to our oceans. Measured them in the hollow of his hand. Meted out the heavens. He arranged the heavens with the span, literally the stretch from his thumb to his pinky. The size of our entire universe is as big as God's hand, metaphorically speaking. He comprehended the dust in a measure. God placed each individual grain of sand on the beaches, each individual speck of dust on the ground of the earth. Each one he comprehended, he knew and knows each one as he placed it exactly where he wants it. He weighed the mountains in the scales and the hills in the balance. Who is he that did that, Isaiah says? It is God who placed each mountain exactly where he wants it, who weighed the hills in the balance where he wants them. He alone can do that. Not any idle man can make. Verse 13. Who directed the Spirit of our Lord, or being his counselor has taught him? Who, the word directed means arranged. You have in verse 12, God arranging the world around us. He arranged the mountains where they should be, the waters where they should be, the span of the universe where it should be. And so he asks in verse 13, who arranged God? Who placed God where he should be? Who is at least as big as God to move him? Nobody. Who is bigger than God to place him? No one. Who directed the Spirit of our Lord? Who placed him somewhere? No one. Who, being his counselor, taught God? No one. God knows all things. Verse 14. With whom did God take counsel? And who instructed God? And who taught God the paths of judgment? Who told God right from wrong? No one. He's the standard. He is what is right. Against his will is what is wrong. Who taught God knowledge or showed him the way of understanding? No one. He knows it all. Behold, verse 15. The nations are as a drop of a bucket, or as counted as the small dust of the balance. Behold, he takes up the isles as a very little thing. He picks up the continents as though they were a child's toy. Who can do that but God? The nations that he picks up are just drops in a bucket to him. He is so humongous. You should be awe-inspired by his magnanimous presence, his magnificent presence. Verse 16. And Lebanon is not sufficient to burn, nor the beasts thereof sufficient for a burnt offering. You could cut down every tree in the mighty forest of Lebanon. You could take every animal that exists in the entire world. You could offer them on the biggest burnt offering altar in the history of humanity. It still would not appease God. Now, he demands sacrifices in the Old Testament, but he approves of them only because he demands of them. You cannot take it upon yourself to appease God. You cannot take it upon yourself to offer a sacrifice that would justify you, which is the point Isaiah is trying to make here to his people. You have sin that has stained your soul and separated you from God. The only way you can redeem yourself is by God. God helping you, not you helping God. Your sacrifices to him are worthless in terms of redemption. Verse 16, or rather verse 17. And all nations before him are as nothing, and they are counted to him less than nothing and vanity. He looks at all the comings and goings, all the doings and workings of man, and he sees it as empty. And it's so small it's not even worth considering, yet he does consider it. It is smaller than nothing, it's just vanity, but he still thinks of it, as we'll see in just a moment. But our goings and our comings, our doings and our workings are just nothing to him, in contrast to the great things that he's able to accomplish in scale. Verse 18. To whom then will you liken God? Or what likeness will you compare unto him? Where can you find anything that is at least as big as God, much less bigger? This word compare means to place on a level, to compare the two sides. But there is nothing as big as God. You have no frame of reference if you were to make a God bigger than God, because you can't fully comprehend God. He is eternal and infinite in his scope and in his scale. And yet, you try with your idols. Verse 19. The workman melts a graven image. The goldsmith spreads it over with gold. Casts silver chains for your pagan priests and priestesses to wear. You make these beautiful golden idols, but they can't compare to God. They can't stand up to his magnificence. And yet, you go and buy them, thinking they can serve you. Verse 20. He that is so impoverished that he has no oblation chooses a tree that will not rot. He seeks unto him a cunning workman to prepare a graven image that shall not be moved. That's that last phrase describing the futility of the idols. You just sit them on a stump and they just sit there. You put them on your mantle and they just sit there. They can't move. And you have the gall, he says to his people, to say to God, I don't have the money to offer a sacrifice. I don't have the means. I'm so poor, I can't offer a lamb on the sacrifice to God. But you'll find a tree, you'll cut down a tree, and you'll take it to the goldsmith and say, cover this with gold, make it an idol for me. You'll take it to the woodworker to engrave it as an image, take it to the goldsmith to cover it with gold, but you'll say you don't have any money. It's just like the Christians today, who will say they don't feel good, they're too sick to go to worship on Sunday, but they're never too sick to go to work, not to go to work on Monday. Oh, I gotta go to work. No, you gotta go to worship. That's the same hypocritical attitude that attacked the Judean people here. Verse 21, have you not known? Have you not heard? Do you not know? Don't you remember what you've been taught? It's been told to you from the beginning, that is, beginning of the Israelite nation. Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? Who founded the world? God did. God alone did. And so that's why you've heard from the beginning of your nation when he gave you 10 commandments to follow, plus many more. But the very first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Why? Because I am the Lord your God. I'm the one who saved you. I'm the one who got you out of Egypt. You worship me and me alone. And yet the people worship a tree. They worship a golden image and not God. Verse 22, how great is he? How huge is he? It is he that sits upon the circumference. My Bible says the circle on the whole circuit, the entirety of the earth. God is the God who sits as a throne above the whole world. There's no other idol that can do that. The inhabitants thereof are just grasshoppers compared to God. He stretched out the heavens like a curtain and spread them out as a tent to dwell in. For you, God took the whole universe and stretched it out with his hands for you to dwell in. The whole universe is for you to live in while you live in this life. He gave you that. He did that. Only he could do that. And yet you worship a tree. 23. He brings princes to nothing. He makes the judges of the earth as vanity. Now he's already described the comings and goings of man as vanity. He's already described the people of the earth as just grasshoppers to him. But it's interesting that he says he makes the princes become nothing. And he'll explain that in the next verse. He makes the judges as vanity. In other words, God, though he is so much bigger than us, and we are so tiny compared to him, he's still interested in us. Now think about that. Do you care about ants? Do you care about the comings and goings and the movings of ants? Do you concern yourself throughout the day with the hierarchy of bees? And yet God, though we are so tiny compared to him and so small and seemingly insignificant, takes great significance in us, cares about us, cares so much that he providentially brings princes to nothing and judges to vanity, so that the right princes and the right judges at the right time will be in power, because he cares about wee little bitty us. So much so, though we are so small and insignificant, yet he sent his son to die for us. Isn't that interesting? 24. Yea, those princes and judges shall not be planted, they will not be sown, their stalk will not take root in the earth. Those judges and princes, those world leaders, are only surface deep. They think that they are planting deep roots and they're going to stay in power for generations to come. But God can blow upon them and they wither. And the whirlwind shall take them away as stubble. They just become tumbleweed. They think, those leaders of the world, even today, that their power and their leadership will stay entrenched forever. That their roots are going to run deep in the earth and no one can move them. But God can just and wither them. 25. To whom then will you liken me, or shall I be equal, says the Holy One. It's almost as if he's challenging his people. Find me an idol that can do what I can do. Make a God that can compare to me. If you can, worship him. If you can't, worship me. That's the challenge Elijah made to the prophets of Baal. If your God is God, then let's serve him. If my God is God, you ought to serve him. 26. Lift up your eyes on high. Look to the stars, he'll say. Behold, who created these things, that brings out their host by the number. Look up at the night sky. Look at all the stars in the host of heaven. Look at all of them. He calls them all by names. He made and named every star in the entire universe by the greatness of his might. For he is strong in power. Not one fails. He brings them out every night. He never fails to show the stars in the night sky. Clouds may cover them, but they're up there. He never fails to produce the starlight to show his magnificence. Look up and see it, Isaiah says. Why would you dare say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel, my way is hid from God? How could you, in light of all that God has done, how could you possibly think that you are hidden from God? Or that your judgment is passed over from your God? When you are in hardship, when you are punished, when you go to Babylon and you suffer mightily, don't you dare say God's forgotten about us. Don't ever say God doesn't know where we are, we're lost. Don't ever think God is so small that he's just the God of Israel, and that if the Israelites are not in Israel, that he doesn't know where they are. God sees all and knows all. He knows where you are when you're punished and where you're suffering. Verse 28. Have you not known? Have you not heard that the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, faints not, is not weary? There is no searching of his understanding. He knows where you are. He's not getting tired. He's not going to be exhausted. He's not going to be weak to work, too tired to help. He gives power. He has so much strength, he can afford to give power. Verse 29, to the faint. And to them that have no might, strength, he increases their strength. If you are weak and tired, if you are frail and unable to work, he can give you strength. He can give you might, courage, valor, ability. And to that Isaiah says, even young people, verse 30, even the youths shall faint and be weary. Even young people, they run long enough, they get tired. They walk far enough, they get weary. Young men shall utterly fall. Even young people get tired. So you're not going to find anybody that you can trust in to stay with stamina and to help you endure like God can. But they that wait upon the Lord shall have their strength be renewed, constantly reinvigorated. You never get weary. You never get tired. You can run, but you'll not faint. You can walk and not be weary. You will mount up, literally ascend, with wings like an eagle, just like the song says. And you will run and run and run, but you'll never get tired. You can walk the long marathon of life, but not give up. Because if you're trusting in the Lord, if you wait patiently with God, He will renew your strength day by day. Though our outward man perishes, our inward man is renewed day by day, Paul says. And that's the message Isaiah leaves to his people. To summarize what will be the whole remainder of the book, you're going into captivity, your Messiah is coming, wait on the Lord, and He will give you the strength to endure. That's Isaiah chapter 40. We'll pick up next time with Isaiah chapter 41 as this theme continues about the greatness of God and how we ought to be just humbled to be in His presence. But we'll pick up chapter 41 next time. Until then, thank you very much.